Ever notice how a book title can sound super straightforward, but then like hint at something way deeper? Take A Room with a View. Sounds kind of lighthearted, maybe even romantic, right?
Hmm.
And it is, sort of. But as we'll see in this deep dive on E.M. Forster's 1908 novel, there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface.
That's Forster for you. He hooks you with charming characters, beautiful settings, but all the while, he's subtly critiquing the social norms of his time, especially those constricting expectations placed on women in Edwardian-era England.
And that's exactly where we find our protagonist, Lucy Honeychurch. We're dropped right into her world, a world kind of on the brink of change, with women like Lucy starting to question their roles. What I find really clever is how Forster uses part one, with Lucy's trip through Italy, to contrast those societal expectations. It's like stepping outside England allows for a whole new perspective, don't you think?
Absolutely. Italy becomes this catalyst for Lucy's own awakening, and you see it right from the start with that whole room with a view dilemma at the pension in Florence.
Oh yeah, the room swap. Seems like such a small thing, but it sets so much in motion.
Right. The Emersons, particularly George, well, they represent a challenge to that rigid social order Lucy's always known. They're less concerned with appearances and way more interested in actually experiencing life, which both intrigues and unsettles Lucy.
And then there's Miss Lavish, that eccentric novelist who sweeps Lucy up in all these adventures, claiming to show her the true Italy. I found myself wondering, is she really a free spirit or just like a caricature of one?
That ambiguity is totally intentional on Forster's part. He leaves it to the reader to decide whether Miss Lavish's influence on Lucy is truly liberating or ultimately superficial.
Good point. But then, just as Lucy's finding her footing in all this newness, we have that dramatic fainting scene after she witnesses the murder. It's like this harsh reminder of life's realities, something her sheltered upbringing hasn't prepared her for. And of course, George is there to catch her, literally.
And significantly, this whole encounter leads to that, shall we say, scandalous kiss amidst the violets.
Scandalous is right. I initially thought those violets were just a romantic detail, but then I learned they actually carry a deeper meaning in literature.
Oh, absolutely. Violets are often linked with innocence, modesty, but they can also represent hidden passions, secret love. That duality really gets at Lucy's internal conflict at this point in the story. She's drawn to George's passion, his unconventionality, yet she's also afraid of what acting on those feelings would actually mean.
And just as she seems to be embracing those new perspectives, she gets whisked right back to, well, the somewhat stifling atmosphere of Surrey. Talk about a contrast to the vibrancy and, well, the freedom she experienced in Italy. It's like you can practically feel the weight of those societal expectations closing back in.
Exactly. Surrey becomes this symbol of, that rigid social hierarchy Lucy's expected to fit into. And to really drive the point home, Forster introduces us to Cecil Vyse, basically the poster boy for a suitable match for Lucy, at least according to Edwardian standards anyway.
Oh, Cecil. He's such a fascinating character study, so determined to come across as this intellectual, refined gentleman, but under it all, there's this real lack of authenticity.
He really embodies the hypocrisy Forster's critiquing throughout the novel. For instance, take how Cecil unintentionally brings the Emersons to Surrey. He suggests the villa as a way to get back at the landlord, completely missing the irony of it all.
It's fantastic, right?
Yeah,
He sees himself as so progressive, so open-minded, but he's totally bound by those societal rules.
totally.
And then there's that unforgettable swimming scene. Can you imagine the scandal it would have caused back then?
Right. That scene is pivotal for a couple reasons. First, it throws the difference between Cecil and George into sharp relief. George is totally in the moment, embracing the freedom and joy of it all, while Cecil is, well, scandalized. It really emphasizes his rigidness. But more importantly, it reveals a new side of Lucy. She sees their unconventionality, and instead of being repulsed, she's drawn to it.
You can really sense it's a turning point for her. Like she's starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, true happiness lies outside of what's considered proper.
Yeah, and yet she's still torn. She lets herself get pulled back into Cecil's world, even agrees to marry him despite, well, those lingering feelings for George.
It's kind of heartbreaking because you see her battling those desires against what's expected of her. And that second kiss, this time not in the field of symbolic violets, but in the quiet of the garden. It speaks volumes.
It's pure, unfiltered emotion. Lucy can't deny her true feelings anymore, and it's worth pointing out that she's the one who kisses him this time. It signals a real shift in her own agency, her willingness to defy those expectations.
It's such a powerful scene. And it leads to her, finally, breaking things off with Cecil. Such a bold move for a woman in her position back then.
Absolutely. She chooses love, personal fulfillment over societal pressure. It's fantastic. But before we jump into the aftermath of her decision, I think it's worth circling back to those literary allusions woven throughout the novel. They add so many layers to the story.
Oh, for sure. I'll admit I didn't catch all of them on my first read. There's Beethoven's sonata, Hausmann's poetry, even a Thoreau quote. What stood out to you?
I find the use of Beethoven's A Major Sonata, the one Lucy keeps playing, particularly interesting. The sonata itself is all about this struggle against fate, finding transcendence. It really mirrors Lucy's own internal journey.
Wow, I did not make that connection. It's amazing how Forster weaves in those layers of meaning.
And it's not just the music either. Even the landscapes are full of literary significance. Remember that scene where Lucy and George first kiss, amidst the violets? It directly echoes a passage from The Road to Rome that play mentioned earlier. The play itself challenges societal norms, celebrating individual choice themes that tie directly into Lucy's own dilemma.
It's like these little literary Easter eggs are there to enrich the whole reading experience. They invite you to think deeper, make connections. So clever.
Exactly. It encourages you to be an active reader, to look beyond the plot. And speaking of looking beyond the surface, we can't forget that unexpected appendix Forster adds decades later.
A View Without a Room. Right. It feels almost like a separate story.
It does, but it's also deeply connected to the themes of the novel. It's like Forster revisiting these characters years down the line, seeing what happens after the happy ending.
It's like he couldn't resist checking in on him, right? But instead of happily ever after, there's loss, hardship, even infidelity. It's a far cry from that idyllic Italian setting, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about the appendix, makes you think. Is that perfect happiness, that room with a view, even possible? Especially with life's, well, complexities, almost like Forster's asking, was that initial view a little naive, a bit too romanticized?
And the title, right, A View Without a Room. Makes you wonder, did they lose that perspective they found together? Or maybe, just maybe, they're discovering a new kind of view altogether, one that includes both the good and the bad. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. You could even say that by adding the appendix, Forster's challenging that whole idea of a single, fixed room with a view. Like maybe it's not about a physical place or some static state of being. Maybe it's more about the journey. Growth, adaptation, finding meaning, even when things are tough.
It's fascinating how much there is to unpack, even with a title that seems so simple. When you really dig into A Room with a View, you find social commentary, literary nods, these really thought-provoking questions about life, love, happiness. What stayed with you?
For me, it's that idea that real freedom comes from, well, defying those societal rules, creating your own path. Lucy's journey, even with all its ups and downs, it really exemplifies that. She chooses love, personal fulfillment. She never loses sight of that inner compass, even when things get tough.
It makes you think, how relevant are those themes even now, over a century later? We might not be dealing with the same constraints as Edwardian in England, but that search for authenticity, for a place where you can truly be yourself, that's universal, isn't it?
100%. And it's that timelessness that makes A Room with a View a book you can come back to again and again. There's always something new to uncover.
So true. And on that note, I'm curious, what does A Room with a View mean to you? Forster leaves us with that question hanging, and it's one worth considering as you finish the novel.
It's like an invitation almost to create your own room with a view, even if it's metaphorical, a space internal, external, whatever it may be, where you can be your true self, challenge those old conventions, and connect with what truly matters.
Beautifully put. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder your own room with a view. Happy reading.